So there's been all these cries for the Mets to fire Carlos Mendoza at 10-21 now. But the Mets haven't fired him yet, and they're heading out to Anaheim for a 3-game series. Where if they sweep, they could be 13-21. And I'm trying to connect the logic here. Like, why not fire him? And I mean, it could be that they expect to struggle on this road trip, and they're just going to fire him before the next homestand to try to give the new manager, a more beneficial start. Because the truth is, I don't think that the Mets, especially now without Luis Robert, that he's probably going on the injured list, I've heard. I think they especially don't match up well against the Angels, and I wouldn't expect them to play very well in this series because the Mets just aren't playing very well in general right now. They're not a very well-constructed team. But part of me also thinks that the reason that Mendoza hasn't been fired yet is that it's the front office saying just that the team is poorly built, that it's either their fault or that you can point it at the players. To me, him not being fired yet when there's been 2 firings of other managers in very similar markets, honestly very similar, just a very similar type of team in the Red Sox and the Phillies, have fired their managers this early in the season after struggling. You figure the Mets would do it too, and they haven't. It just speaks volumes to me that Mendoza probably is still very supported by the players, and not that I care, but that he's very supported by the front office. That doesn't really matter to me. It shouldn't really matter to any Mets fan, but it shows that he is, and it's important to his job status at the very least, whether or not he's fired. But what's also important to whether or not he's fired is how the Mets do in these upcoming games, and the Mets just feel doomed right now because the narrative around the team is just so negative. The payroll is so high. And the truth is, it's kind of asking for trouble because the problem is right there. It's inherent. When you look at Bo Bichette's contract, when you look at Juan Soto's contract, people are going to bring up their payroll, but their payroll is kind of special in terms of the contracts that they have on their books being as big as they are. Where the Yankees, just look at the Yankees, contract distribution and the Mets contract distribution. A lot of these Yankees contracts were signed, in just a different era of economics and a different era of inflation, really. Not a different era of economics, a different era of inflation. When, a $30 million contract was the peak, the biggest that could be given out, when that Aaron Judge contract was, about as big as that contract was ever going to be. I think if Aaron Judge was a free agent today, he gets a $50 million paycheck, but he gets more than Bo Bichette does. Bo Bichette got 52.5. Of course, Aaron Judge was going to get way more than that, right? I mean, these contracts are ridiculous. Why do you think we're probably about to have a strike? And there's going to be this sort of seller's market that, frankly, may be the only hope for the Mets at this point, right? That there's just this crazy, bonanza at the trade deadline in the lead up to this, CBA, this strike in the upcoming offseason, possible strike in the upcoming offseason. And there's just this trade deadline bonanza where entire teams are able to sort of fundamentally change their rosters. But I don't know if the Mets have a strong enough farm system to actually do that. If they want to get rid of the guys that they're actually optimistic about, I think it would be smarter for the Mets to sell, to just deal away what they've brought in, even if it's Bo Bichette. I mean, Bo Bichette's only on a 1-year contract. If you look at the Mets contract, sure, some of these contracts are ridiculous, and you can pull out their payroll and go, oh, their payroll is so high, and it is. But a lot of these contracts are short-term deals for very high amounts of money that they can trade away if they don't mind eating the money. They can trade away Bo Bichette this trade deadline if they don't mind eating a lot of that money. I would imagine a lot of teams would love to have Bo Bichette for, not for $52.5 million, but for a significantly, reduced chunk of that. So like I said in my previous video, the path forward for the Mets is 2027 and 2028. And if the guy that they envision in 2027 and 2028 leading a fully functioning and, just functional Mets team is Carlos Mendoza, just, put out a press statement like teams like to do and say that and don't fire him, right? Just say we're taking a different approach, right? We're just taking a different approach from the Phillies and the Red Sox. That's not what we're doing. We're not going to fire our manager that early. We still believe in Carlos Mendoza because right now I'm just reading it as, the front office saying it's on us, or everyone else in the organization pointing at the players and saying that it's on the players. And, Juan Soto has been trying to do more as a leader on the Mets But the problem is, it's kind of crazy, but the Mets still feel like they don't have that guy, right? I feel like I'm still being reminded of the Ed Kranepool rant of the Don LaGreca, Michael Kay show. Ed Kranepool. Ed Kranepool? That's your guy? That's your forever guy? I'm still thinking about that rant to this day with the Mets, because I have to imagine in the annals of Mets history, in those record books, it's still Ed Kranepool that probably holds a lot of the records. And who is the guy in Mets history who's played his whole career as a Met and retired a legend as a New York Met? David Wright was riddled with injuries. Mike Piazza played and was associated with many other teams. Darryl Strawberry won 3 championships as a Yankee, right? Nolan Ryan threw 7 no-hitters. He didn't throw one of them as a Met. Right, there's a lot of great lines in that range. And look up Don LaGreca, Ed Kranepool ran. But the truth is, the Mets still don't have their forever guy in that way. You can't say that it's Soto. Soto's played for many other teams. You can't say that it's Lindor, who's always going to be associated with the Guardians/Indians. And the worst part to me is, who would it have been? Well, Brandon Nimmo. No, Brandon Nimmo was brought up through the Mets system, longtime center fielder, excellent player, underrated by the rest of the league, beloved by Mets fans as it was sort of starting to be realized, like, oh, this could be the guy who stays around. And of course, the Mets trade him to Texas, where he continues to be an underrated player to this day. And one of the more solid center fielders in the league, as the Mets continue to struggle in center field, putting Luis Robert on the IL today. And of course, the infamous, Pete Crow-Armstrong trade. And yeah, I'm sorry, I had to stop and go check. It's actually true. They traded Pete Crow-Armstrong for Javier Baez, right? I mean, if you want to know how a team ends up in a situation like this, it's with moves like that. It's by shooting yourself in the foot. It's by taking out your own stability, right? That, like the Yankees, it's like, we look back, the Yankees didn't make that trade with the Braves where they traded, what was it, Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez to the Braves for Jason Hayward or something like that. Like, they didn't make that trade, okay? Like, and that's why the Yankees are where they are and why the Mets are where they are. It's the moves you don't make. It's the stability that you don't sacrifice. And that's why I think ultimately it would be better for the Mets to sell at the deadline this year. And if they want to keep Mendoza, just, shut your ears. I mean, it's hard to do as a New York sports team, and especially when you're just constantly getting derided and made fun of, as the Mets do, which tends to happen. Like, truthfully, I know I'm saying it as a Yankee fan. I'll make fun of them, I'm sure, too. But they get constantly derided and made fun of as a franchise. It can't be easy. I think if they do fire him, it would be more, something would have to fray at the connection between him and the players, or him and the front office. And I still think that hasn't happened. Either that, or he's about to get fired and they're just going to have a new manager on the new homestand. But I'm curious as to who that would be, like Joe Girardi or something like that. Now, as I'm filming this video, I open up ESPN and see this article that says that the Mets aren't firing Carlos Mendoza, that the Mets are sticking by Carlos Mendoza, which, that's usually, if you see an article like that at the very top of ESPN, that's usually not just good information. It's borderline a leaked story. It is a leaked story, basically. It's insider information, direct from the source, if it's the top story on ESPN, which it currently is right now. So yeah, Mendoza's staying. So the rest of this video was gonna be me speculating on who the next manager could be, because it's probably not gonna be Joe Girardi or anything like that. But yeah, it's gonna be Carlos Mendoza is going to be the next manager of the Mets. He's gonna remain the manager of the Mets, and I think the truth is, it provides stability. It keeps, the team in touch with a leader who they clearly still don't have a problem with, but it's also important noting that this is an extremely young team. It's actually one of the younger starting lineups in the league. A lot of players under 30, at least at this point. There are some players on the injured list, of course, but including Soto, a lot of this team is still under 30 years old, with Lindor being, one of the more veteran voices in the locker room. And it's kind of a funny in-between spot, because, you want to add leadership, so, but you can't really add veterans. Adding veterans isn't really going to help. I think that you just have to accept that, it's a young team, it's a lost season, you've got 130 games left to play. I think the smartest thing to do would be to just take the pressure off a little bit, right? People are going to keep joking about the Mets, but if it's just established that the Mets are bad this year, over time, the sort of wider appeal of ripping on the Mets constantly, it's going to quiet down a little bit, and the Mets will be a little more able to to do their business and just go about, growing their team and growing this young core. And it might actually be nice for the Mets to face, not just some low pressure, but some no pressure environment, because that's sort of what I'm thinking that Brett Baty and Mark Vientos need. Well, imagine if the Mets are just, not extraordinarily bad, not 100 loss bad, but, on the way to a 93 loss season and just an empty Citi Field. Sure, it might be spiritually draining at times, but playing in a zero pressure environment like the minor leagues or an empty stadium could really be exactly what Mark Vientos and Brett Baty need, because playing in a pressure-packed environment certainly isn't doing it. But I would also like to offer a little bit of criticism of Juan Soto to close this video, because Juan Soto could be being the leader that this team needs right now. And I know that that's a little cynical, and people sort of like to see it as, that's just not the type of person that he is. But okay, I would argue that's because of his talent, though. Right? People who are as talented as Juan Soto, someone as naturally gifted as Juan Soto, his personality is shaped by his abilities. His personality is shaped by his ego. And there is an ego with Juan Soto. And I'm not, trying to go zen on somebody or be high and mighty or something and say, Juan Soto's got to get rid of his ego, because I would have, like the memes, I would have a massive ego if I was the third string running back for, a UFL team. I would have a gigantic ego. So I can't speak on Juan Soto and his ego, but I can speak on what I know as a Yankee fan. And the Yankees do their homework, right? The Yankees read their scouting reports, right? Cody Bellinger, Aaron Judge, Ben Rice is obsessed with sabermetrics and analytics. By the way, you can tell by his Baseball Savant page how obsessed he is with launch angle and optimizing his launch angle and his exit velocity, especially. Ben Rice is a monster of exit velocity. And Giancarlo Stanton, all those guys read their scouting reports. They do their homework, right? Ryan McMahon, he probably gets, Ryan McMahon he's not a great hitter. He's not a very naturally talented hitter, but he's still a consummate professional as a player, and I think it's part of why the Yankees picked him up. I know that I'm big on ripping on Ryan McMahon, and I didn't like the Ryan McMahon trade, but as a baseball player, not as a hitter, I don't like him as a hitter. I don't want him in the lineup as a hitter, okay? But as a baseball player, he's a professional. He gets to the stadium at 1 p.m. for a 7 p.m. game, just like Aaron Judge, just like Cody Bellinger. He gets the scouting reports from the analytics department. There's that big analytics department for a reason, right? He gets the scouting reports in his locker the second that he sits down. He sits there, and Ryan McMahon reads through every throw that he took that previous day, the speed and the distance of every single throw, the velocity of every single ball that was batted to him, the velocity of every single ball that he hit, the metrics of every single pitch that he saw, and he goes through and he reads through his scouting reports. Do you think Juan Soto does that? No. He's too talented to do that. I'm telling you, he's too talented. I can't speculate, right, on whether or not he shows up to the ballpark on time or something like that. Because I've always sort of been like, I don't know. I don't know if Juan Soto, being as talented as he is he the kind of guy who, like Reggie Jackson, might just show up to the ballpark at 5:30 for a 7 p.m. game sometimes. Now, I can't speak on that. And, again, if that were to get out with the payroll that he has, with the salary that he has, yeah, it would be unexcusable and it would be a big story. So you'd understand that not being something that people would share, not something that people are privy to, right? But I can tell from Juan Soto's natural intuition and the way that he naturally goes through at-bats that he is not sitting in his locker reading his scouting reports every day with his teammates. He picks and chooses the sabermetric and the analytic information that, he thinks will be relevant about the pitcher that he's facing or the ballpark, right? He's picking and choosing it. He's not going through and flipping through and reading all the scouting reports and obsessing over his exit velocity and his launch angle like, the players on the Yankees do, like players on the Braves probably do, like players on the Dodgers definitely do, but like I'm sure that players on the Yankees do. I don't know what good example Brett Baty and Mark Vientos and whatever young player, Carson Binge, whatever young prospect the Mets are about to bring up from the minor leagues when the next injury happens or just whenever they want to make a change, Ronnie Mauricio. Who do these young players, all this lineup full of players under 30, who do they have to look for an example, right? Who do they have to look for, right? Okay, they have Lindor to look for when times are good. They have Soto to look for an approach, right? If you want to watch him, want to lead by example at the plate in terms of how you actually approach an at-bat, okay, watch Juan Soto, but good luck duplicating it. That's part of my problem with it. Right, that's part of the problem with Juan Soto as a player, actually, and as a very mercenary player. Just fundamental aspect of Juan Soto as a player. Sure, you can watch it, you can look and watch and admire, but good luck duplicating it. It's like Bryce Harper. It's like expecting there to be another Bryce Harper. He's not going to walk through the door. It's why Yankee fans still regret not getting Bryce Harper to this day. You can approximate him with Cody Bellinger. It's not going to be Bryce Harper. So if there's only one Juan Soto, then leading by example isn't relevant and doesn't help the other young players. And there is only one Juan Soto. Right? So that's my criticism of Juan Soto, actually. That's what I love about Aaron Judge. There's only one Aaron Judge. There's not another Aaron Judge walking through that door. He's 6'10". He still leads by example and does the work every single day. Now, okay, in the offseason, he literally has his own personal hitting coach, so that's not a great example, but like every day he is in there doing the work with his teammates in a way that's very visible and very clear to the young players. There isn't really a fundamental disconnect in terms of his daily routine, his daily schedule, and his habits from what the young players do and what they can see. And that's a very important part of the New York Yankees. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily a part of the New York Mets and necessarily a part of Juan Soto's relationship with the other players on the New York Mets. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on the New York Mets situation right now. They're going to stick with Carlos Mendoza. I just wanted to fire off a video about why I think that is and offer my criticism of, Juan Soto's role on this team, because I've seen that as being an issue for not just quite a while, but an issue for the future, that Juan Soto needs to be a more visible day-to-day leader and rely less on his talent to determine his outward personality, because it just seems like in every conversation about Juan Soto, it just leads back to, oh, but he's such a great hitter. He's such a naturally great hitter. He's leading by example. I don't really believe you can lead by example when you're Juan Soto, right? When you're that special, you're not really leading by example. And this is a young team. It's not the Dodgers, right? I think you could probably say the same thing about Shohei Ohtani, why the Angels struggled with Shohei Ohtani, especially because Shohei Ohtani, he isn't that kind of leader either, really. He's exceptional and puts an exceptional amount of his own work in, obviously, because he has to, being a two-way player, right? He can't really lead by example in that same way, but that's not really relevant on the Dodgers because they're such a veteran and professional group, right? But yeah, let me know what you guys think about all that. Let me know what you guys think about Mendoza. If you guys would rather they fire Mendoza, if there's somebody else you would want in the Mets managerial seat, like and subscribe, and I will be back in the future with more baseball content for you guys. Peace out.